Two men in their early 20s work a groundskeeping job they are not qualified for. They rake leaves, they set up chairs, they drive a golf cart around a park that belongs to a man they barely understand, for a boss who is a gumball machine, alongside a yeti, a ghost, and a candy-shaped man who is older than the universe. And roughly once a week, that ordinary job collides with something cosmic. A board game that traps them inside it. A video game boss that becomes real. A coffee shop that turns out to be a front for something else. And in the final stretch of the series, the discovery that everything they have ever lived through is part of a loop, a universe that has reset an unknown number of times and will reset again. That is the plot of Regular Show. Stated plainly, with the comedy stripped out, it does not sound like a slacker comedy at all. It sounds like a cosmology for 8 years, from September 2010 to January 2017. Regular Show pretended to be a small show. It pretended its biggest stakes were a missed deadline or a broken golf cart or an argument over a sandwich. And underneath that, slowly, patiently, it built one of the strangest and most complete mythologies in the history of television animation. 261 episodes, 8 seasons, and when it ended, it did something most shows are afraid to do. It left questions open, not by accident, by choice. This is a video about those questions. Not fan theories, not invented lore, the genuine gaps in the canon of Regular Show. The things the show set up and never fully closed. The things it answered halfway and then walked away from. The mysteries that are still sitting there inside the finished, completed, officially ended series, waiting for anyone who decides to look closely. Welcome to Velvo. Get comfortable. This one goes deep. Let us get into it. Start with the largest question the show ever raised, because it is also the one the show most deliberately refused to answer. How many times has the universe ended? Here is what the show tells you directly. In the final stretch of Season 8, the season that was promoted under the title Regular Show in Space, the series stops being a comedy about a park and becomes a story about Pops. Pops Maillard. The tall, pale, candy-headed man in the brown suit who has spent every previous season being the gentlest and most childlike presence in the cast. The one who says good show and means it. The one who is delighted by trampolines and frightened by almost nothing because he never seems to fully understand that danger is real. For 7 seasons, Pops is comic relief. He is softness. He is the character the show uses when it wants the audience to feel safe. And then Season 8 tells you who he actually is. The episode that begins this turn is The Key to the Universe. It is the 21st episode of Season 8, and it aired on November 10th, 2016. In it, an ancient figure named Earl begins training Pops for a fight. Not a comedic fight, a real one. Because Pops, the show reveals, was born on a planet called Lollyland, and he was not born as Pops. He was born as Mega Cranus, described in the show's mythology as the highest state his species can reach, the embodiment of pure good. And the universe, in the show's logic, cannot allow a being of pure good to exist without a counterweight. So when Mega Cranus was born, something else was born to balance him. A twin. An equal force pointed in the opposite direction. Malum Cranus, the character the show calls Anti-Pops. And the two of them have fought before. That is the part that should stop you. The fight between Pops and Anti-Pops is not a new event. It is not the climax of one story. It is a recurrence. The show, through Earl and through the seer and through the ancient tapestries the crew finds later on, Lollyland tells you that this battle has happened over and over across the entire lifespan of the universe, and that every single time it has ended the same way. A stalemate, neither brother wins. And when neither brother wins, the universe resets, it ends, and it begins again. 14 billion years later, slightly different, and the two brothers are born again, and they fight again, and it ends again. Think about what that actually means for the show you have been watching. Every episode of Regular Show, every one of those 261 episodes, every coffee with Margaret, every argument between Mordecai and Rigby, every quiet afternoon in the park, all of it is happening inside one cycle of a loop that has run many times before and is scheduled to run again. The park crew are not living in the universe. They are living in a draft of the universe, one version among many. And here is the gap. Here is the thing the show sets up with enormous weight and then deliberately does not resolve. It never tells you how many times. It would have been easy to. A single line of dialogue. Earl could have said a number. The seer could have said a number. The tapestries on Lollyland could have shown a count. The show chose not to. What it gives you instead is Earl's body. Earl is covered in markings, and the implication the show offers, quietly without underlining it, is that those markings are a record. A tally of the cycles he has lived through, training Pops each time, watching the same fight reach the same stalemate, watching the same universe collapse and restart. Fans who have studied the show closely tend to settle on a rough estimate of around 20 cycles, reading it off the visual count of Earl's tattoos. But that is a fan reading. It is an inference. The show itself never confirms it. That is not an accident. That is a choice. And it is worth sitting with why a show would make it. If regular show had given you a number, the loop would have become a fact. A piece of trivia. 20 cycles. File it away. Move on. By withholding the number, the show keeps the loop as a feeling instead of a fact. It stays vast, it stays unmeasured. You are told that the universe has ended many times, and you are never allowed to know exactly how many, and that not knowing is the point. It is the difference between being told the ocean is 4 kilometers deep and being told the ocean is deep. One of those is information. The other is awe. And there is a second layer to this, one the show buries even deeper. The seer, the cosmic figure the crew consults near the end, tells them something specific about their particular universe. She tells them it has lasted longer than most, that this cycle, the one containing the park and the coffee shop and Mordecai and Rigby, has run longer than the cycles that came before it. Let that sit for a second, because it is one of the most quietly devastating things the show ever says, and it says it almost in passing. The universe you have been watching is not special because it is the first. It is not special because it is the last. It is special because it lasted, because it got more time than the versions before it. And the people who made regular show were, at that exact moment, near the end of an 8-year production. They had run longer than most shows run. They were, in a very real sense, a universe that had lasted longer than most. The Seer's line is not just lore. It is the writers looking at their own show and describing it. The cycle is the series. The reset is cancellation. And the fact that this universe lasted longer than the others is the staff quietly telling you they knew how lucky they had been. The show does not comment on this. It does not add music to tell you how to feel. It just lets the seer say it and moves on. So the first unsolved mystery of regular show is not really a mystery in the sense of the missing puzzle piece. It is a mystery in the older sense of the word, a thing too large to be fully known, presented as too large to be fully known, on purpose. The universe has ended many times. It will end again. The number is unknowable. And the show wants it that way. There is a question that follows directly from this one, and the show is even quieter about it. If the universe resets, and the brothers are born again each cycle, then the park resets too. Which means the park, the specific park with its specific snack bar and its specific golf cart and its specific house, has either never existed before or has existed in some other form many times over. And that raises a question the show raised across all 8 seasons without ever once stating it out loud. What is the park actually? Not where. What? That is what the next section is about. Before that though, the loop deserves one more moment, because there is a detail inside the finale that makes the whole thing land differently once you notice it. In the 3-part finale, a regular epic final battle and The Power, which aired together on January 16, 2017, the loop is finally broken. Pops does not accept the stalemate. He does something none of the previous cycles versions of him ever did. Instead of simply fighting Anti-Pops to a draw and letting the universe reset, he reaches out to his brother. He embraces him, and he sacrifices himself to destroy them both, ending the cycle permanently, so that the universe will continue rather than reset. Here is what that means, stated as plainly as possible. Every previous version of Pops, across every previous cycle, chose the fight, chose in effect to let everything end and start over rather than do the harder thing. And the version of Pops you spent 8 years watching, the silly one, the gentle one, the comic relief, is the one who finally chose different. The nihilism of the loop was never the truth of the show. The loop was the problem. Pops was the answer. And the show spent 7.5 seasons making you underestimate him so that this would land. That is not a small thing. That is the whole architecture of the series. Hidden in plain sight, inside a character who spent most of his screen time laughing at Balloon. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The park at closing time has a specific quality of light. The sun is low and orange. The snack bar is shut. The golf carts are parked in a row near the house and nobody is around. For most of 8 seasons, this is the resting state of regular show, the place the camera returns to. The park is the show's home, the way a sitcom has a living room and a workplace, and for a long time the audience accepts it as exactly that, a setting, a backdrop, a place where the events happen. But the park is not a backdrop. The park is a question the show keeps almost answering. Consider what you actually know about it. The park is owned by Mr. Mayallard, an elderly man who appears only occasionally, usually to make demands of Benson, the gumball machine who manages the staff. Mayallard is forgetful, a little gruff, not unkind. For most of the series, he reads as a standard absent owner character the rich old man who shows up to create a deadline and then disappears. And then season 8 reveals that Mr. Maillard is the man who raised Pop, not Pop's biological father. Pops, remember, was born on Lollyland as Mega Cranus. But after the previous cycle's final battle, Pops landed on Earth, and Maillard found him and named him Pops because of his old grizzled face, and chose to raise him as a son. And here is the detail that reframes everything. Maillard knew what Pops was. He knew about the destiny. He knew his adopted son was a cosmic being who would one day have to fight his twin brother for the fate of the universe. And knowing all of that, Maillard made a decision. He decided to give Pops a normal life for as long as that life could last. So he built the most normal place he could think of. He built a park. Once you see that, the park stops being a setting. The park becomes a deliberate construction, an act of love and also an act of concealment. Maillard did not buy a park and happened to employ Pops there. Maillard, the show implies, arranged the entire environment around the goal of giving a universe-deciding being the most ordinary possible existence. The groundskeeping, the snack bar, the slow afternoons, the small stakes, all of it is, in a sense, a set, a protective ordinariness built on purpose so that Pops could be a person before he had to be a savior. And this is where the gap opens, because the show tells you this about Pops and then leaves a much larger question hanging. How much of the rest of the park was also engineered? Think about the things Maillard set up. In Season 8, it is revealed that Maillard prepared specific objects and events for Pop's eventual destiny. A fire VCR, an ice tape, the dome experiments, the recurring science project subplots in which a dome is constructed over the park, which turn out to be preparation for the park itself being launched into space. Maillard, it emerges, spent years quietly laying groundwork. The dome was never just a quirky science episode. The dome was a survival mechanism built in advance for a journey Maillard knew was coming. Now hold that next to a simple fact about the park staff. The park employs a Yeti who is functionally immortal. It employs a ghost. It employs a man older than the universe. Its manager is a sentient gumball machine. The idea that this specific collection of beings simply applied for groundskeeping jobs and were hired at random strains under its own weight. The show never says that Maillard assembled the park staff deliberately, but the show also never says he did not. And it gives you a man who demonstrably engineered the park down to the VCR and the dome, and then it shows you a staff that no ordinary park could possibly have assembled by chance. That is the gap. The show confirms that the park was built as a shelter for Pops. It strongly implies that Maillard's planning ran far deeper than anyone realized, and then it simply declines to tell you where the planning ends. How much of the park crew's life together was arranged? How much of the friendship between Mordecai and Rigby and Skips and Benson and Pops exists because Maillard, somewhere off-screen, decided Pops should not be alone? The show does not answer. It leaves the park as a place that is partly a workplace and partly a machine, and it never draws the line between the two. And here is the part that makes this genuinely poignant rather than just a piece of unresolved trivia. The finale closes with the park itself surviving. After Pops' sacrifice, after the loop is broken, the crew returns home. Benson eventually becomes the owner of the park after Maillard's death. 25 years later, the old crew gathers there again. The park outlives Maillard. It outlives Pops. The thing Maillard built as a temporary shelter for one being becomes the permanent center of gravity for everyone that being ever loved. So, what is the park? The show never gives you a single clean sentence, but the evidence it does give you points somewhere specific. The park is not where the story happens. The park is the story. It is a shelter built by a father for a son who was never really his son, and it is the only thing in the entire series that was designed, from the beginning to last. The universe resets. The park somehow, in the end, does not. And there is one detail about Maillard himself that the show plants quietly and never fully resolves. And it deserves its own moment because it is the emotional core underneath everything this section has described. In the Season 8 material, Maillard says, in essence, that he may not be Pops' real father, but that Pops was always his real son. Sit with the order of that sentence. He is not Pops' father by blood. Pops was a cosmic being who landed on Earth, whom Maillard found and named and chose. By every technical measure, the relationship is an accident, a stranger taking in a foundling. And Maillard rejects that framing completely. He says the son was always real. The fatherhood was always real. The thing that was not real, the blood, was the thing that did not matter. And here is the gap, the genuinely unresolved tension. Maillard knew the entire time he was raising Pops that he was going to lose him. He knew about the destiny. He knew the day would come when Pops would have to leave the park, leave Earth, leave him, and go fight a brother for the fate of the universe, and that the fight would, in all likelihood, kill him. Maillard raised a son knowing the son had an expiration date written into him by the structure of reality itself, and he did it anyway. He chose to be a father to a child he knew he would have to give back to a cosmic battle. The show never asks you to dwell on what that cost Maillard. It never gives you the scene of Maillard alone contemplating the loss he had signed up for. It just gives you the forgetful old man who shows up to yell about deadlines and lets you discover in Season 8 that the forgetful old man had been quietly carrying that knowledge for the entire run of the series. That reframes every appearance Maillard ever made. Every time he showed up at the park, gruff and demanding, he was a man visiting a son he was deliberately keeping in the dark, a son he was protecting from a destiny by surrounding him with ordinariness. A son he knew he would outlive in every way that mattered, or worse, would not outlive at all. The delaying was the love. Maillard delayed Pops' destiny for as long as he possibly could. He bought his son years. He bought him a childhood, a job, friends, a slow and gentle life. All of it manufactured, all of it a shelter, all of it built by a father who knew exactly how the story ended and chose to give his son as much time before that ending as one man could arrange. And in the finale's montage, Maillard is simply gone. He dies off screen between the lines of the montage, and Benson inherits the park. The show does not give Maillard a death scene. It does not give him a farewell. The man who built the entire shelter, who carried the secret for 8 seasons, who loved a son he knew he would lose, exits the series in a clause. And that, too, is the show declining to underline something, trusting you to feel the size of a quiet man's sacrifice without being told to. That is a very different reading of a slacker comedy's main location, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. There is a character standing in that park in almost every episode, who has been alive far longer than the park has existed. He fixes the golf cart, he gives quiet advice, he says very little, and the show tells you a great deal about how he became what he is, and almost nothing about how long he has had to be it. That is the next section. Skips throws a sandwich. That is how it starts. In an episode where Mordecai and Rigby decide to ask him about his immortality, the conversation begins with lunch. Skips tosses a sandwich to Mordecai, who catches it. He tosses one to Rigby, who misses, and it falls to the ground. And Rigby, half joking, says he would have caught it if he were immortal like Skips. That small throwaway moment is the door into one of the most carefully constructed backstories the show ever told, and also into one of its most quietly unanswered questions. The episode is Skip's Story. It is the 22nd episode of Season 5, and it is built differently from almost everything around it. Most episodes of regular show run 11 minutes and lean comedic. Skip's Story is a half hour, and it is not really a comedy at all. It is a tragedy with a frame around it. Here is what the episode tells you. Skips was not always called Skips. As a teenager, he was called Walks, and Walks was not a quiet, wise, sandwich-throwing yeti. Walks was angry. He had been expelled from a string of schools for fighting. He arrives at Bennett High School with a record and an attitude, telling the headmaster that school is worthless for an adventurer like him. And then he meets 2 things that change the entire shape of his life. He meets a group of beings called the Guardians of Eternal Youth, and he meets a girl. The girl's name is Mona, Desdemona, and the episode does something patient and unhurried with their relationship. It plays a falling in love montage, Walks and Mona spending time together, their feelings deepening, and the show splices that montage against scenes of the Guardians of Eternal Youth constructing a set of weapons called the Fists of Justice. 2 things being built at the same time, a love and an instrument of war. The show is not being subtle about what it is doing here. It is telling you these 2 things are connected. It is telling you the war is going to cost the love. Because there is a villain. The Guardians of Eternal Youth have a brother named Clorgbane. Clorgbane wanted to join them, wanted to become a member of what was then called the Immortal Student Council, and was refused because the way he had pursued power was through cruelty. And the council calculates that one person can defeat Clorgbane, Walk, with the Fists of Justice, so Walks fights Clorgbane at Bennett High, and he wins. He does not kill him. He sends him into orbit around the solar system. But in the fight, the building comes apart. Debris falls, and Mona is killed. The show holds on this. It does not rush past it. Later, one of the Guardians of Eternal Youth pulls a locket from the rubble, the locket Walks had given Mona. And that is how the death is confirmed. And the episode then jumps forward. A few years pass. Walks is shown again, and he is unkempt now, stubbled, hollowed out. The show describes this through Skips' own narration and the framing scenes, telling Mordecai and Rigby it had been a very rough time. And then the Guardians come to him with an offer. Clorgbane will return. They have calculated it. He will come back, and someone will need to fight him again, and the cycle will repeat. So they offer Walks immortality, the power to live without aging so that he can be there every time. to fight Clorgbane when he returns. And they warn him what immortality costs. They tell him that if he accepts, he will watch everyone he loves grow old and die while he does not. And Walks, with tears in his eyes, tells them that he has already lost the one person who mattered. The Guardians ask him to choose a new name to be reborn into, and Walks thinks about Mona. He thinks about the time they had together. And the name he chooses is Skips. That is the whole story. Mordecai and Rigby in the framing scenes are reduced to tears by it. Now, here is the part that the episode answers and the part it does not. The episode answers why. It tells you exactly why Skips is immortal, exactly why his name is what it is, exactly what he lost to become the calm, careful figure you have watched for 5 seasons. It reframes everything. The patience is not a personality trait, it is a scar. The wisdom is not a gift, it is the residue of grief that has had a very long time to settle. The quietness of Skips is the quietness of someone who learned a long time ago that loud things break. But the episode does not tell you how long. This is the gap, and it is a genuine one. The show establishes that Clorgbane returns on a cycle. The number the show attaches to that cycle is 157 years. Skips became immortal so that he could be present for each return, which means Skips's age is, in principle, a calculable thing. It is some number of cycles of 157 years. And the show never gives you the number of cycles. Think about what that does. Every time you watch Skips in an ordinary episode, every time he fixes a cart or gives advice or arm wrestles or plays bass guitar, you are watching a person whose true age is deliberately left as a blank. He could be 2 centuries old. He could be many centuries old. The show shows him fighting Clorgbane in the present day in other episodes, which means at least 1 full cycle has passed since the events of Skip's story, and probably more. But it never lets you do the arithmetic. It never lands on a figure. And that withholding is doing the same thing the withheld number of universe cycles was doing in the first section. It is keeping a feeling instead of giving a fact. If the show told you Skips was, say, 471 years old, that would be trivia, knowable, finite, filed away. By refusing the number, the show keeps Skip's loss open-ended. The grief does not have a measurable size. It is just long, longer than you can picture. He has done the spirit dance, the ritual he must perform to maintain his immortality, on every single one of his birthdays for a span of time the show will not let you measure. He has buried an unknown number of friendships. He has watched an unknown number of people he cared about reach the end of their lives while he stayed exactly as he was. There is a detail in the finale that makes this land even harder, and the show plays it with almost no emphasis at all. When the park crew returns from space at the end of the series, Skips is greeted by a single figure, Tecmo. And Tecmo, the show has established in earlier episodes, is one of Skip's oldest friends from the adventures of his youth, and crucially, Tecmo was also granted immortality. Tecmo is the one person who greets Skips on his return because Tecmo is, in a real sense, the only person left who was there at the beginning. Everyone else from Skip's original life is long gone. The show does not say this. It just has Tecmo be the one standing there, and lets you understand why. And then there is the very last image the finale gives you of Skips. In its closing montage, the montage jumps 25 years into the future and shows what became of everyone. Mordecai becomes a painter, Rigby marries Eileen and has children. Muscle Man and Starla have more kids, Benson reunites with Pam and becomes the owner of the park. High Five Ghost reunites with his girlfriend Celia, and the two become party DJs in Prague. Everyone moves forward. Everyone's life changes shape. And Skips is still single. Skips is still working at the park. The one change the show gives him, the single visible difference after 25 years, is that he now wears shorts instead of jeans. Think about what that gentle little joke is actually saying. 25 years pass. For an immortal, 25 years is almost nothing. A thin slice of a life that has already run for centuries and will run for centuries more. Of course, his life does not change shape. Of course, he is still at the park. The shorts are the show's way of acknowledging the truth softly. Time moves for everyone in that montage except Skips. For Skips, the montage is just another short stretch of an immortality the show has never let you measure. His friends got a future. Skips got more of the same long present. So the unsolved question here is not really how old is Skips. The show could answer that and it would not matter much. The deeper unsolved thing is the one the show built on purpose. It made Skip's loss unmeasurable, so that it would stay large. He is a character defined by a grief with no number attached, standing quietly in a park, throwing sandwiches, being the person everyone relies on, while carrying a length of sorrow the show will not let anyone, including the audience, fully see the size of. That is not a small thing. That is the show telling you something about Skips that none of his rare lines of dialogue ever do. There is another figure in this mythology who is defined by a counterpart the way Skips is defined by Clorgbane and Pops is defined by his brother. But this counterpart raises a harder question than either, because the show goes out of its way to suggest he might not have chosen to be what he is. That is the next section. Before that, a reminder, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What does it mean to be created as a balance for someone else? Not born, not raised. Created specifically because a being of pure good came into existence and the universe could not tolerate that good existing alone. That is the question hanging over Antipops, and regular show raises it deliberately and then, characteristically, declines to fully answer it. Here is the mythology as the show lays it out across the final stretch of Season 8. Pops was born on Lollyland as Megacranus, the highest state his species can reach, the embodiment of pure good. And the show is precise about what happened next. It does not say that an evil being happened to be born around the same time. It says that in order to balance Pops, something created his brother, Malum Cranus. Antipops, the counterweight, the equal and opposite force, brought into being not by its own will but by a cosmic necessity. Good appeared, and so evil had to appear because the system the show describes cannot hold one without the other. Sit with the implication of that because it is genuinely dark, and the show mostly lets you find the darkness yourself. If Antipops was created as a balance, then Antipops did not ask to exist. He did not choose evil the way a villain in a simpler story chooses evil. He was generated automatically as the negative space around his brother's goodness. His entire nature, his drive to destroy the universe, his role in the eternal stalemate, all of it was assigned to him at the moment of his creation, for the sole reason that Pops was good and something had to be the opposite. Antipops is, in this reading, a being who was sentenced to be a villain before he had ever done anything at all. This is the gap, and it is one of the most uncomfortable ones in the series. The show frames Antipops for most of Season 8 as a straightforward antagonist, a cataclysmic being. A threat, the thing the heroes must stop, that is the surface. And on the surface, Antipops behaves like a villain should. He attacks, he pursues, he kills. In the episodes leading toward the finale, after Pops attempts to befriend his brother, to reach him, to find some path other than the fight, Antipops responds by killing Earl, the ancient figure who trained Pops. Antipops kills Pops' teacher in response to Pops' kindness. On the surface, that is the act of an irredeemable villain. But the show has already told you that Antipops was made this way, and those two things sit against each other and do not resolve. Here is what makes this more than an abstract puzzle. The finale's resolution depends entirely on Pops treating Antipops as something other than a simple villain. Every previous cycle of the universe, the brothers fought to a stalemate. Pops fought Antipops, neither won, the universe reset. And the thing that breaks the loop, the single act that ends 261 episodes and an unknown number of universal cycles, is that Pops stops fighting his brother and reaches out to him instead. Pops embraces Antipops, and then Pops sacrifices himself to destroy them both, ending the cycle so the universe can continue. Read that against the idea that Antipops never chose to be evil. If Antipops was created as a balance, against his own will, then the embrace in the finale is not just a hero showing mercy to a villain, it is a brother acknowledging that the other brother was also a victim of the system. It is Pops recognizing that Antipops did not deserve his nature any more than Pops deserved his. They were both assigned, they were both generated, and the only one of them who was ever in a position to break the cycle was the one who happened to be created good. The show does not state this. It does not give Antipops a redemption speech. It does not have a character turn to the camera and explain that Antipops was a tragic figure. It just gives you the mythology, the created as a balance origin, and then it gives you the embrace. And it lets the two things touch and trusts you to feel the friction. And the friction is real, because if Antipops never chose, then the universe regular show describes as a deeply unfair one. It is a universe where a being can be brought into existence for the express purpose of being destroyed, over and over across every cycle, simply because his brother needed an opposite. The eternal stalemate, read this way, is not a war between good and evil. It is two prisoners, both sentenced at birth, fighting each other forever, because the structure of reality demands it. And the heroism of Pops in the finale is that he is the only version of either brother across every cycle who looked at that structure and refused to keep feeding it. The unanswered question, then, is the moral one. Was Antipops a villain, or was Antipops the universe's longest-running victim? The show gives you enough to argue it either way and refuses to settle it. It hands you a being who does monstrous things and a backstory that suggests he was built to do them, and it leaves you holding both. That is a very different kind of antagonist than a slacker comedy is expected to produce, and the show produced it in its final season. quietly underneath a story that was still finding time for jokes about space. That refusal to settle the moral question is, in its own way, the bravest thing the finale does. It would have been easy to make Anti-Pop simply bad. It chose, instead, to make him a question. There is a kind of question regular show like to raise that is smaller than cosmic mythology, but in its own way just as unresolved, because the show used a particular device again and again across all 8 seasons and never once committed to a consistent set of rules for it. That device is time travel. That is the next section. Regular show uses time travel early. The second episode of the second season is called It's Time, and it first aired on January 3rd, 2011, which means the show reached for time travel before it had even finished its first full year on the air. The premise of that episode is almost aggressively casual. Mordecai and Rigby get into a fight, the conflict escalates, and Mordecai ends up sending the two of them traveling through time by destroying all the clocks. That is the mechanism. Destroying clocks. The show does not explain it. It does not build a theory of how time works. It treats time travel the way it treats everything else in those early seasons, as a thing that can simply happen if the episode needs it to. And that casualness is the seed of one of the show's most genuine, unresolved questions. Because over the next 7 seasons, the show keeps coming back to time travel, and it never stops being casual about it, and the rules never line up. Here is the gap, stated plainly. Regular show is a time travel show that has no model of time. Some shows that use time travel commit to a fixed timeline, where the past cannot be changed and any attempt to change it was always already part of history. Other shows commit to a mutable timeline, where changing the past changes the future, with consequences that ripple forward. Others use branching timelines where every change spawns a new parallel reality, and the original continues untouched. These are not just technical distinctions, they determine what time travel means, they determine whether the past is fragile or fixed, whether the future is earned or assigned, whether a character's choices matter. Regular show never picks one. Across its run, it shows you future versions of Mordecai and Rigby. It shows you the past being visited, it shows you time being broken and repaired. And the logic shifts from episode to episode depending entirely on what that episode needs. In one story, the future is a fixed thing that can be glimpsed. In another, the past is something that can be altered. The show is not building a coherent physics of time. The show is using time as a toy, picking it up when an episode wants it and putting it down again without ever writing the manual. For most of the series, this does not matter, because the show is a comedy and the inconsistency reads as part of the joke. The casualness is the humor. Of course, destroying clocks causes time travel. Of course, the rules are whatever they need to be. That is the texture of the show. That is the world where a gumball machine manages a Yeti. But it matters enormously in the finale, and this is the part that turns a minor inconsistency into a genuine unsolved question. The third part of the series finale is titled The Power, and the title is not random. The Power was the name of the very first episode of the entire series, an episode about a magical keyboard, a piece of the show's own origin, which first aired on September 6th, 2010. By titling the finale's final chapter after it, the show is closing a loop that runs the full length of its existence. And in that finale, Mordecai and Rigby use the power and find themselves reliving the first episode of the show. They are placed back inside the beginning, they experience the start of the series again from inside it, and they come to understand that they need to return to the present to help Pop. So the finale of Regular Show is, mechanically, a time travel story. The two main characters travel back to the show's own beginning, and then forward again to its end. And because the show never established what time travel means in its universe, the finale's central mechanism is operating without a defined rulebook. The show is asking you to feel the weight of Mordecai and Rigby returning to where they started, the full circle of an 8-year journey. And it is asking you to feel that weight using a device it deliberately never made coherent. And here is the strange thing. It works anyway. The inconsistency does not break the finale. It almost helps it, because the finale is not really interested in time travel as physics. It is interested in time travel as memory. When Mordecai and Rigby relive the first episode, the show is not testing a theory of causality. It is showing you two characters confronting who they used to be. It is putting the people they have become next to the people they were when the series started, and letting the distance between those two versions be the emotional content of the scene. 25 years later, in the closing montage, the two of them reflect on how immature they used to be. The time travel in the finale is a way of standing in two places in your own life at once. It is not science. It is the feeling of looking back. So the unsolved question of time in Regular Show is genuine. But the show's answer to it is almost a refusal to treat it as a question. The show used time travel for 8 years without rules, and when it needed time travel to carry the entire emotional weight of its ending, it simply trusted that the audience would not be reaching for a rule book. It bet that you would feel the return to the first episode rather than analyze it, and the bet paid off. The lack of a consistent model of time is technically a flaw, but the finale converts that flaw into something else. It turns the show's lifelong casualness about time into the exact mechanism by which it lets two characters say goodbye to their younger self. That is the gap, and it is the rare gap that the show leaves open not out of mystery, but almost out of confidence. Regular show never explained how time works in its universe, and then it asked time to carry its farewell, and time did. There is a moment in that same closing montage that opens a different kind of question. A quieter one. It concerns a character who appears for only a few seconds, who is never named, and whose namelessness the show's own writers later confirmed was a deliberate choice. That is the next section. Before that, a reminder. If you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a woman in the final montage of regular show, and the show never tells you her name. The montage comes at the very end of the 3-part finale. After Pops' sacrifice, after the loop is broken, after the crew returns home and erects a memorial statue of Pops in the park, the show gives you a sequence showing what became of each character. It is a fast, warm, generous montage, the kind a long-running show earns the right to do. And in Mordecai's portion of it, the show shows him leaving the park, becoming a painter, building a life as an artist, and it shows him meeting someone, a woman. A bat, someone the montage indicates he marries and builds a future with. She has no name, the show does not give her one. She appears, she is clearly significant, she is the person Mordecai spends the rest of his life with, and the script never attaches a single word to her as identification. This is not an oversight. This is the part that makes it a genuine, confirmed creative choice, rather than a loose end. After the finale aired, the question of the character's name came up among fans, naturally, because she is Mordecai's wife, and the audience had spent 8 years invested in Mordecai's romantic life. And members of the show's writing staff addressed it directly. Head writer Matt Price and writer Owen Dennis both indicated in public comments that there had been no plans to give the character a name. The namelessness was intentional. The show meant to leave her as a blank. So the unsolved mystery here is not who is she. The show is telling you, deliberately, that her specific identity is not the point. The unsolved question is the harder one underneath it. Why would a show that spent 8 years building the romantic life of its main character end that life with a person it refused to name? To understand the choice, you have to understand what the show is doing with the rest of Mordecai's montage, because the namelessness only means something next to the other detail the show includes. For most of the series, Mordecai's romantic life had 2 centers of gravity. The first was Margaret, the Robin who worked at the coffee shop, the person Mordecai pined after for the early seasons. The relationship the show built and complicated and never quite let resolve. The second was CJ, a character introduced later, a relationship the show developed with real care, and that also ultimately ended. 2 major relationships, years of screen time, 2 people the audience knew by name, knew the faces of, knew the histories of. And in the finale montage, the show makes a specific pointed decision about them. Mordecai becomes a painter, and the montage indicates that in his art he uses the likenesses of Margaret and of CJ. He does not end up with either of them. The finale does not reunite him with either, but he carries them. He puts them into his paintings. The 2 named, known, fully developed loves of his life become in the end subjects of his art, present but his images, held onto but at the distance of a canvas. And the person he actually marries, the person he actually spends his life with, is given no name at all. Now the choice starts to come into focus, and it is sharper than it first appears. The show is drawing a line between the relationships that were stories and the relationship that was a life. Margaret and CJ were stories. They had arcs, they had beginnings and middles and ends. They were, in a sense, the romances of Mordecai's 20s, the dramatic, eventful, painful, formative relationships that a young person has and learns from and does not necessarily keep. The show gave them names because they were narratives, and narratives need names. The woman at the end is not a narrative. She is the person who comes after the narratives are over. She arrives in the part of Mordecai's life that the show is no longer dramatizing, the long, quiet, unremarkable, happy stretch that a montage can only gesture at. And the show makes a quiet argument by leaving her unnamed. It is saying that this part of life does not work like a story. The person you actually build a life with does not need to be a plot. She does not need an arc the audience followed. She just needs to be the one who is there in the years after the dramatic years, when the painful romances have become paintings on a wall. There is something almost protective in the choice, too. If the show had named her, fans would have built her a history. They would have wanted her backstory, her arc, her episodes. She would have become another character to be analyzed, debated, ranked. By leaving her nameless, the show keeps her outside all of that. It keeps her as what she is meant to be, which is not a character but a destination. The show is not asking you to get to know her. It is asking you to understand that Mordecai got there. That after Margaret, after CJ, after all the awkwardness and pining and false starts the show spent 8 years on, Mordecai arrived somewhere settled. The woman is not a person the show wants you to study. She is the evidence that Mordecai is okay. That is the gap, and it is one of the most deliberate ones in the series. The show withholds the name on purpose, and the withholding is the meaning. Mordecai's great romances were named because they were stories. His actual marriage is nameless, because it is not a story. It is the thing that comes after the story, and the show, with real restraint, refuses to turn it back into one. The namelessness of Mordecai's wife is one small piece of a much larger withholding that the entire finale montage performs. The montage tells you what happened to everyone, and it tells you almost nothing about how anyone felt about it. That larger silence is the next section. The closing montage of regular show covers 25 years in a few minutes. It is one of the most efficient pieces of storytelling the show ever produced. And it is also one of the most revealing, not because of what it shows you, but because of what it refuses to. Here is what the montage gives you. After Pop's sacrifice, the crew returns home and builds a memorial statue of Pops in the park. And then the show jumps forward and tells you briskly and warmly what became of each member of the crew. Mordecai quits his job at the park and becomes a painter, and meets the woman he marries. Rigby marries Eileen and they have children together. Muscleman and Starla move into a nicer trailer and have more children. Benson reunites with Pam, the scientist, and the two of them raise 4 cats and a pig, and Benson becomes the owner of the park after Mr. Maillard's death, training a new batch of workers who look strikingly similar to the crew he had before. High Five Ghost reunites with his girlfriend Celia, and the two of them become popular party DJs in Prague. Skips is still single, still at the park, now in shorts. And 25 years after the adventure in space, the whole crew gathers back at the park, and Mordecai and Rigby reflect on Pops' sacrifice and on how immature they used to be, and they decide to go and play some old arcade games. That is a complete set of endings. Every major character is accounted for, every life is given a shape. By the standard of series finales, it is generous and it is tidy. Almost nothing is left dangling, and yet the montage withholds something enormous, and it withholds it so smoothly that most viewers do not notice the absence at all. It tells you what happened. It never tells you how anyone felt. Think about what these characters just lived through. They watched Pops die, not a stranger, not a minor figure. Pops, who had been part of the park for as long as any of them could remember, who was gentle and trusting and childlike, who sacrificed himself specifically so that the rest of them could go on living. They returned from space carrying that. They built a statue of him, which means they stood together and designed a memorial, which means they had to decide how to remember someone, which is one of the heaviest things a group of people can do together. And then the montage simply moves on. It shows you Rigby's wedding, it shows you Benson's cats, it shows you Prague. The grief is never dramatized. Nobody is shown crying after the first wave of it. Nobody is shown struggling in the years that follow with the loss. The show does not give you the scene of Mordecai sitting alone somewhere a year later thinking about Pops. It does not give you Benson, now the owner of the park, walking past the statue and stopping. It does not give you the hard parts of mourning. It gives you weddings and careers and cats. This is the gap, and it is worth being precise about what kind of gap it is, because it would be easy to mistake it for a flaw. It is not a flaw. It is a decision, and it is consistent with how regular show handled emotion across its entire run. Regular show was fundamentally a show that showed you behavior and trusted you to extract the feeling. It almost never had characters announce their emotions. When Mordecai was heartbroken, the show did not give him a monologue about heartbreak. It showed him sitting on a roof, not moving. When Skips carried centuries of grief, the show did not have him describe it. It had him be quiet and patient and let you understand. The show's entire emotional method was the behavioral read. Do not state the feeling, show the action, let the audience do the final step themselves, because the feeling a viewer assembles for themselves lands harder than the feeling a script hands them. The montage is that method applied to grief and applied at scale. The show does not show you the crew mourning Pops because the show has decided that the mourning is yours to do. It gives you the statue, one image, and then it gives you 25 years of good lives, and it trusts you to understand the relationship between those two things. The good lives are the grief, the fact that Rigby got to marry Eileen, that Benson got to fill a home with animals, that High Five Ghost got to be happy in Prague. All of it exists because Pops chose to die so that it could. Every happy ending in that montage is quietly a thing Pops bought. The montage is not avoiding Pops' death. The montage is the consequence of Pops' death. Every wedding in it is a receipt. And there is one more layer, the one that makes the montage land as something more than tidy. When Mordecai and Rigby gather with the crew 25 years later, the show has them reflect on how immature they used to be. That single beat is the show's acknowledgement that time did its work. These are not the same people. The Mordecai and Rigby who started the series were two slackers in their early 20s who could barely hold a groundskeeping job, who created most of their own disasters, who avoided every hard conversation they could avoid. The Mordecai and Rigby at the end of the montage are people who can look back at those slackers with a kind of fond distance. They grew up. The montage does not show you the growing up, the difficult middle of it, the years of becoming. It shows you the before and the after and trusts the gap between them. So the unsolved question of the montage is not a plot question. Every plot thread is tied. The unsolved question is an emotional one, and the show leaves it open deliberately. How did these people carry Pops' death through 25 years? The show does not say. It hands you a statue and a set of happy lives and steps back. It treats the audience as capable of holding the weight without being instructed how. That is the show's lifelong method. Used one final time. On its largest subject, the montage looks like it answers everything. What it actually does is leave the most important thing, the grief, entirely in your hands. There is a scene at the end of season 4 that most people remember as a breakup and then move past. It deserves more than that because it is the closest thing regular show ever made to a clean, conventional tragedy, and the show's handling of what came after it raises a genuine question about how the series treated its own emotional history. The episode is Stake Me Amadeus. It is the finale of season 4, and it aired on August 12, 2013. By this point in the series, Mordecai's pursuit of Margaret has been running for 4 seasons. It started in the first season in an episode called Caffeinated Concert Tickets, and across those 4 years, the show built it carefully. The early awkwardness, the near misses, the slow shift from one-sided crush to something mutual. By season 4, Mordecai and Margaret are actually dating. The show, after 4 years of holding the question open, of never letting the two of them quite arrive, finally let them. And Stake Me Amadeus is the episode where Mordecai decides to make it official. He takes Margaret to an upscale restaurant. He is nervous the way the show has shown him nervous 100 times, and the episode wraps the dinner inside one of its typical escalating action plots, a gang shootout, the kind of chaos the show used to keep a romantic scene from becoming too still. And in the middle of all of it, Mordecai asks Margaret to be his girlfriend. Officially. The thing 4 seasons were building toward. And Margaret says no, not because she does not care for him. The episode is precise about this. She has been accepted into the college she wanted, her dream school, and she has to leave. She tells Mordecai, through tears, that she cannot be his girlfriend, and then she runs out of the restaurant, devastated, and Mordecai drops to his knees, and the show holds on him. The episode ends with Mordecai on the roof of the house, where the show always puts him when he is at his lowest, looking at the sunset, and Rigby comes up and sits with him and brings him a case of soda and does not say much, because there is not much to say. Here is what makes that scene matter, and matter more than a standard breakup. The show did not break them up because Margaret stopped loving Mordecai. It did not break them up because someone cheated, or because they fought, or because the relationship failed. It broke them up because Margaret got something good. Her dream college, the relationship ended not because it was bad, but because two people's lives pointed in different directions at the same moment, and one of them had the courage to follow hers. That is not a cartoon breakup. That is one of the truest things the show ever depicted. People who love each other do not always get to stay together, and the reason is often not a villain or a flaw, but simply timing, simply the ordinary fact that lives move. Now here is the gap, the genuine unresolved thread, and it has 2 halves. The first half is what the show did next. After Stake Me Amadeus, the show introduced CJ. CJ had actually appeared once before, in an earlier episode, but it is after the Margaret breakup that she becomes central. Mordecai meets CJ again at a New Year's Eve party, both of them masked, neither recognizing the other, and they kiss at midnight, and when the masks come off, they are both startled. And the show builds a second romance. Mordecai and CJ date, and the show develops it with care, gives it real texture, makes CJ a fully realized person rather than a replacement. And then Margaret comes back. She returns in the 6th season, and the show does something that, depending on how you read it, is either honest or cruel. It puts Mordecai's 2 great loves in the same space. Margaret, returned. CJ, present. And in a Christmas episode, Mordecai and Margaret reminiscing clear up a misunderstanding, and they kiss. They kiss while Mordecai is dating CJ, and CJ sees it, and the love triangle that follows is messy and painful and unresolved for a long stretch of the show, and it makes things awkward not just for the three of them, but for the entire friend group around them. The unresolved question the show leaves with this is not a plot question, it is a question about Mordecai himself, and the show never quite answers it. Did Mordecai ever actually finish grieving Margaret? The CJ relationship begins very soon after the Margaret breakup, and the moment Margaret reappears, the old feelings are still live enough to produce a kiss. The show presents this without judgment, mostly, but it also does not resolve it. It never gives you a clean scene where Mordecai understands his own heart, sorts out what Margaret was and what CJ was, and arrives at clarity. The triangle just causes damage, and then, eventually, both relationships end. Mordecai takes a break from dating after the CJ relationship does not work out, and the show leaves the deeper question of whether Mordecai was ever honest with himself about either woman, sitting open. The second half of the gap is the finale, and this is where it connects to something discussed earlier in this video. In the closing montage, Mordecai does not end up with Margaret. He does not end up with CJ, he becomes a painter and marries the unnamed woman, the one the show deliberately refused to name. And the montage indicates that he uses the likenesses of Margaret and CJ in his art. Think about what that means as a final statement on this thread. Mordecai did not get a clean answer to the question of his own heart inside the series. The show never gave him the scene where he figured it out, so the show gave him a different ending instead. It made him an artist, and it had him put both women into his paintings. He carries them, not as a couple, not as a regret exactly, but as images. As part of the material of his work, the show is saying, in its quiet behavioral way, that Mordecai never resolved Margaret and CJ as relationships, so he resolved them as art. The thing he could not settle in his 20s, he turned, in his 30s and beyond, into the subject of a creative life. And there is one more verified detail that the finale's epilogue and the staff's later comments add. Margaret, after the series ends, continues her career. According to head writer Matt Price, Margaret kept on as a newswoman, traveling to other places, building exactly the life that her dream college in Stake Me Amadeus was the first step toward. And she still kept in touch with Mordecai, with Eileen, with Rigby. That detail closes the loop on the breakup in the gentlest possible way. Margaret left Mordecai for college, and the show years later confirms that the college was worth leaving for. She got the career. The thing she cried over giving him up to pursue, she actually pursued, and it worked. The breakup in Stake Me Amadeus was not a tragedy that wasted her departure. It was the price of a life she went on to actually live. And the fact that she kept in touch means the love did not become nothing, it became friendship. The thing she and Mordecai had agreed to be back when she first returned. The romance did not survive. The connection did. So the unsolved thread of Mordecai's love life is real, and the show leaves it deliberately incomplete. It never gave Mordecai self-knowledge inside the series. It never told you cleanly what Margaret meant versus what CJ meant. It left the triangle as damage and then ended both relationships and moved Mordecai forward into a marriage it would not even name. But look at the shape of it from a distance, and the show is making an argument. The same one it makes everywhere. Some things in a life do not get resolved as events. They get resolved as the rest of the life. Mordecai's 20s were a tangle of feeling he never sorted out, and the show's answer was not to sort it out for him, but to show him, decades later, painting it and married and okay. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a character in regular show who shows up to take people away, and the show makes him a recurring comic figure, and almost nobody stops to notice how strange that is. The character is Death. Not a metaphor for death. The actual Grim Reaper, rendered as a pale British man on a motorcycle, and one of the most genuinely peculiar pieces of the show's mythology, because the show never resolves what his rules actually are. Here is what the show establishes. Death exists in the world of regular show as a real embodied figure. His job is what you would expect. When a being's time comes, Death is the one who handles the passing. And Death has a long history with Skips. The show frames them as frenemies, lifelong rivals, two figures who have known each other for an enormous span of time. And the source of the rivalry is structural. Skips struck a deal with the Guardians of Eternal Youth. Skips is immortal, which means Skips is, in a literal sense, a permanent problem for Death. He is a being who is supposed to be subject to Death's job and has been granted an exemption. Every year that Skips performs his spirit dance and renews his immortality is another year that Death does not get to do, with Skips the one thing Death exists to do. That is a genuinely strange relationship to build a comic rivalry on, and the show mostly plays it light. Death shows up, there is banter, there is competition. Death and Skips have faced off in a dodgeball tournament. Death once attempted to expose Skip's true name, Walks, to his friends. The rivalry is played as the kind of long-running grudge between two people who have known each other too long to ever fully be enemies and are too fundamentally opposed to ever fully be friends. But here is the gap, and it is a real one. The show never establishes what Death can and cannot do. Watch how inconsistent his power is across the series. In some appearances, Death is genuinely fearsome, a figure with real authority over life and ending. In others, he is almost domestic. He has a wife, he has a son, he gets invited to things. Death is invited to Muscle Man's wedding. Death is invited to Pops' party in the episode Cheer Up Pops. Death shows up in Exit 9B to help the park workers fight on their side as an ally. And in the finale, Death is among the many figures who return to help in the Great Battle, fighting against the cosmic threat. So which is it? Is Death an awesome and terrible cosmic force, the literal end that comes for all living things? Or is Death a guy from the neighborhood who comes to weddings and helps out in fights and has a family and a motorcycle? The show never picks. It uses whichever version the episode needs. And unlike the time travel inconsistency discussed earlier, which the finale managed to convert into something meaningful, the Death inconsistency mostly just sits there unresolved. A character whose fundamental nature the show was content to leave undefined for 8 years. And yet there is something worth noticing in that refusal. Because it may not be carelessness, it may be the show once again declining to make something smaller than it is. Think about what it would mean to give Death a fixed, consistent set of rules. The moment the show tells you exactly what Death can and cannot do, Death becomes a system, a mechanic, a known quantity. And Death, the real thing, the actual fact of mortality that the character is named after, is not a known quantity. It is the least known quantity there is. By keeping Death inconsistent, by letting him be terrifying in one episode and warm in the next, fearsome here and domestic there, the show keeps the character closer to the actual texture of how Death sits in a life. Sometimes it is the most frightening thing imaginable. Sometimes it is oddly ordinary, a presence at the edges of celebrations, something you can almost be on friendly terms with. The character of Death is not consistent because the thing he represents is not consistent. It is enormous and casual at the same time, and the show, perhaps without ever planning it, built a character who is both. And the relationship with Skips, read this way, becomes quietly profound. Skips is a being who cheated Death, who made a deal to be exempt from the one universal rule. And the show could have made Death hate him for it. Instead, it made them frenemies. It made Death keep showing up, keep competing, keep being around. The show is suggesting that even the man who escaped Death does not get to escape Death's company. Death still comes to the party. Death still stands at the edge of Skips' immortal life year after year, a reminder that the exemption is a deal, not a victory, and that the rivalry will outlast everyone Skips has ever loved except the other immortals. Skips beat Death's job. He did not get rid of Death. Nobody does. The show makes that point not with a speech, but by simply never letting the character leave. So the unsolved question of Death's rules is genuine, and the show never closes it, and the closing may not have been the point. A consistent Death would be a smaller Death. The show kept him a contradiction because the thing he stands for is one. There is a piece of the show's machinery that runs underneath multiple seasons, quietly, easy to dismiss as a recurring joke, and the finale reveals that it was load-bearing the entire time. It is the dome. That is the next section. For several seasons, regular show runs a recurring subplot that most viewers file under comedy. A dome. A giant transparent dome, the subject of a science experiment placed over the park to create a contained, controlled ecosystem. The show calls it the Dome Experiment, and when it appears in the register the show uses for its odd or lower stakes ideas. A strange project, a quirky bit of background business. Something the park is involved in that produces episodes and then recedes. And then season 8 begins, and the show reveals that the dome was never a joke. The dome was a plan. Here is how it pays off. Season 8, promoted as regular show in space, takes the entire park into space. Not metaphorically. The actual park, the actual house, the actual snack bar and golf carts and the ground itself is sealed inside the dome and launched off the Earth. The dome becomes the park dome, a self-contained piece of Earth flying through space, and it is the vessel that carries the crew through the entire final season. The contained ecosystem that the dome experiment was supposedly testing turns out to have been exactly what it sounds like. A way to keep the park, and everyone in it, alive away from Earth. And the dome was Maillard's. Tie this back to what was established earlier in this video about the park as a deliberate construction. In Season 8, it is revealed that Mr. Maillard prepared specific things for Pops' eventual destiny. A Fire VCR, an ice tape, and the dome experiments. Maillard, knowing that Pops would one day have to leave Earth to face his brother, knowing that the park would need to travel, spent years running what looked like a harmless science project. Because that science project was the survival mechanism for a journey he knew was coming and could not yet explain to anyone. This is the gap, and it is one of the more elegant ones in the series because it reframes a viewing experience retroactively. When you watch the Dome episodes the first time, you watched comedy, a weird experiment, a funny premise. The show gave you no reason to treat the Dome as important, and you did not. And then the finale arc arrives and tells you that every Dome episode you half paid attention to was Maillard in the background of the show, building the lifeboat. The setup was hiding in plain sight, dressed as filler for seasons. The show was planting a thing it knew it would need and disguising the planting as a joke. Think about the discipline that requires. To set up a major plot mechanism seasons in advance, you have to be willing to let the audience underestimate it the whole time. You have to be willing to let people watch the Dome and think it is nothing. The show could have flagged it, it could have added ominous music, a meaningful look, a line of dialogue hinting that the Dome mattered. It did not. It let the Dome be small, on purpose, so that when it became enormous, the becoming would feel like a revelation rather than a payoff you had been waiting for. The show was not being subtle by accident. It was being subtle as a strategy. And there is a question the Dome leaves genuinely open, the same kind of question Maillard's planning always leaves open. How early did the show know? How much of the Dome in its first appearances was the writers already planning the Season 8 launch, and how much was a comic premise that the writers later recognized they could repurpose? The show never tells you. From the outside, you cannot fully distinguish a plant that was always meant to grow from a plant that was discovered, after the fact, to be useful. Both produced the same result. A dome that was a joke and then was a lifeboat. But whichever it was, the effect on the finished series is the same, and it is the effect that matters. Regular show, watched in order, teaches you that its small things are not always small. It teaches you that the background of the show is not safe to ignore. The Dome is the clearest single proof of that. A piece of recurring comedy that turned out to be the literal vehicle the entire final season depended on. And once you have learned that lesson, once you have seen the Dome become the Park Dome, you cannot watch the rest of the series the same way. Every recurring object, every quirky background project, everything the show seemed to be treating as filler, you start to wonder. You start to watch the edges. The show trained you, with the Dome, to take it more seriously than it appeared to take itself. That is the genuine legacy of the Dome as an unsolved question, not the mechanics of how a park survives in space. The deeper thing, the Dome is the show admitting that it was always playing a longer game than its 11-minute episodes let on, and refusing to tell you exactly when that game began. There is one more piece of the finale that performs a quiet trick, and it concerns the park itself and what Benson does with it after he becomes its owner. That is the next section. Before that, a reminder, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. In the closing montage of regular show, Benson becomes the owner of the park after Mr. Maillard's death. And the show gives that development a single detail that is easy to miss and once noticed as one of the strangest and most quietly resonant things in the entire finale. Benson, as the new owner, hires a new batch of park workers, and the new workers look strikingly similar to the old ones. Sit with that for a moment, because the show offers it almost as a throwaway, and it is not a throwaway at all. For 8 seasons, Benson was the boss, the gumball machine who managed the park staff, who was perpetually exasperated by Mordecai and Rigby, who threatened to fire them in what felt like every other episode, whose blood pressure was a recurring joke. Benson's entire characterization was built on friction. He was the one who wanted the work done right, surrounded by a Yeti and a ghost, and 2 slackers who created disasters. The comedy of Benson was the comedy of a competent, anxious person trying to manage a group that could not be managed. And in the end, the show makes him the owner. He inherits the whole thing, and the first thing it shows him doing with that inheritance is rebuilding the crew, hiring people who resemble the people he used to manage. The exasperated boss, given total authority, chooses to recreate the exact situation that exasperated him. This is the gap, and it is a behavioral one, the kind the show specialized in. The show never has Benson explain this. It never gives him a line about why he hired workers who look like the old crew. It just shows you that he did, and it trusts you to understand what it means. And what it means is that the friction was never the thing Benson actually disliked. The friction was the thing Benson loved and could not admit he loved. Think about the whole series in light of that one detail. Every time Benson yelled at Mordecai and Rigby, every time he threatened to fire them, every time he clutched his chest in frustration, the show was, on the surface, showing you a man who wanted different employees. Better ones who would not cause disasters. But the show also showed you again and again that Benson never actually got rid of them. that when it genuinely mattered, Benson protected them, fought beside them, grieved with them, included them. The yelling was real, but it was not the truth. It was the surface. The truth was a man who had built, without ever meaning to, a family out of the people he was technically supposed to be irritated by. And the new workers detail in the finale is the show confirming it in the gentlest and most indirect way possible. Given the chance as owner to staff the park with anyone, Benson reaches for the shape of the crew he had. He does not want a frictionless park. He wants the park back. He wants the noise and the chaos and the disasters and the exasperation, because all of that, it turns out, was the texture of the best years of his life. And he did not know it until those years were over, and he had the power to either move on or recreate them. And he chose to recreate them. There is a question the show leaves open here, and it is a tender one. Does Benson know? Is the new crew a conscious decision, a man deliberately rebuilding the thing that made him happy? Or is it something more unconscious? A man simply instinctively reaching for the familiar without examining why? The show does not say. And the not saying is, again, the point. If Benson explained it, the moment would become sentiment. By leaving it silent, the show keeps it as behavior, and behavior is always more honest than explanation. Benson hired workers who look like Mordecai and Rigby and Skips and the rest, and whether he could articulate the reason or not, the reason is the same. He missed them, the boss missed the employees, the man whose entire comic function was wanting them gone spent the rest of his life surrounding himself with their reflection. That is what the show does with Benson, and it does it in a single image inside a fast-moving montage, and it never underlines it. The exasperation was the love. It always was. The show told you that for 8 years through the fact that he never got rid of them, and then it told you one last time, after everything, through the fact that when they were gone, he built them again. There is one character left whose ending the montage gives you, and her arc across the series is the longest quiet transformation the show ever attempted, and almost nobody talks about it. That is the next section. There is a version of Eileen that the show has never shown you directly. To find her, you have to watch the whole series at once, from beginning to end, and pay attention to a character the show, for a long time, did not ask you to pay attention to. Eileen Roberts has the longest quiet transformation in regular show, and the show performs it so gradually that most viewers never register it as an arc at all. Start at the beginning. Eileen debuts in the second season. Her first real appearance, the one the show treats as her introduction, is an episode called Do Me a Solid, which aired on May 2nd, 2011. And in that episode, and for a good stretch afterward, Eileen is defined almost entirely by one thing. She has a crush on Rigby. She is a waitress at the coffee shop, Margaret's friend, a student, and the show's framing of her is, by the admission of the people who made her, not flattering. Minty Lewis, the storyboard artist who voices Eileen, has described Eileen's earliest appearances as coming across as a fairly big weirdo nerd with a major crush on Rigby. That is the starting position. Eileen is the nerd who likes Rigby, and Rigby does not like her back, and the comedy of those early episodes runs on exactly that gap. He sees her as a pest. He avoids her. The show invites you at first to find her a little mutt. Now jump to the end. By the finale's 25-year reunion, Eileen is married to Rigby. They have 2 daughters, young adults by then, and along the way in season 8, Eileen did not stay behind on Earth. She went to space with the rest of the park crew, and she became a space ranger alongside them, a full participant in the final season's cosmic story. The character who started as the nerd with a crush ends as a wife, a mother, and a member of the crew that saved the universe. That is an enormous distance. And here is the gap, the genuinely under-discussed thing. The show never gave Eileen a single dramatic transformation episode to cover that distance. There is no Eileen story. There is no half-hour special where Eileen confronts her past and emerges changed. Skips got Skips' story. The Mordecai-Margaret romance got finale after finale built around it. Eileen got no such thing. Her transformation is not located in any one episode. It is spread thinly and evenly across the entire run of the series. In small moments, most viewers absorbed without noticing. Look at where the show actually does the work. There is an episode called Camping Can Be Cool, and it is the first time the show genuinely lets Eileen be more than a crush. Mordecai and Rigby and Margaret and Eileen go camping. Mordecai and Rigby lose the matches and argue about how to start a fire, and Eileen, without fuss, simply starts one the old-fashioned way. And Rigby, almost against his will, is impressed. He says it was kinda cool. And Eileen blushes, and then Rigby, unsure of himself, throws a package of hot dogs to break the moment, because the show is not ready yet to let it land. But the show showed you something there. It showed you that Eileen is competent, resourceful, that she knows things, can do things, that the supposedly cooler characters cannot. The same episode has her name a constellation that Mordecai and Margaret are puzzling over, and she does it without even looking up from the video game she is playing. That is the technique the show used on Eileen for 8 years, not a transformation. An accumulation, episode by episode, the show added one more small piece of evidence that Eileen was smart, that Eileen was capable, that Eileen got straight A's in her college classes, that Eileen had interests and a polished competence and an inner life. It never announced any of this. It never gave her a spotlight to declare it. It just kept laying down evidence, quietly, in the corners of episodes that were ostensibly about other people, until the weight of the accumulated evidence had completely changed who Eileen was. And the change had happened so slowly that you could not point to the moment it occurred. And the show was at the same time using Eileen to do something to Rigby. This is the part that connects her arc to the spine of the series. Rigby, for most of regular show, is the immature one, the slacker's slacker. Where Mordecai at least gestures at ambition, Rigby is defined by avoidance, by whining, by self-absorption, by a refusal to grow. And the show needed a way to demonstrate Rigby's growth that was not a speech. Because the show did not do speeches. Eileen became that way. G. Quintel, the show's creator, has pointed to the Rigby and Eileen relationship specifically as an example of Rigby's growth as a character. The fact that Rigby, over the course of the series, comes to genuinely love Eileen, the nerd he once avoided, is the show's proof that Rigby changed. You can measure Rigby's maturity by his distance from Eileen. Early on, the distance is large. By the end, there is no distance at all. He marries her, he builds a family with her. The arc of Rigby growing up and the arc of Eileen being seen are the same arc, viewed from two sides. So the unsolved question with Eileen is not a plot mystery. Every fact of her ending is on screen. The unsolved thing is more of a question about the show's method, and it is this: how do you tell the longest character transformation in a series without ever once making an episode about it? The answer regular show found is the accumulation, used at a scale it used nowhere else. Eileen changed more than almost anyone in the series, and the show changed her the way real people actually change, which is not in a single dramatic episode, but slowly, in small increments, in the background of other events, until one day you look up and the person is someone else and you cannot say when it happened. That is why the version of Eileen the show never showed you directly is the truest one. The competent, intelligent, fully realized woman who went to space and saved a universe and built a family was always there, from Do Me a Solid onward. The show just trusted you to assemble her yourself, one quiet piece at a time across 8 years, and most viewers did, without ever noticing they were doing it. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a moment in Season 3 where Muscle Man learns that his father was not the man he thought he was, and the show treats it as a comedy episode complete with exploding trucker ghosts and a road trip. Strip the comedy away and look at what literally happens, and you find one of the most genuinely complicated portraits of grief and inheritance the show ever produced. The episode is Trucker Hall of Fame. It is the 30th episode of the 3rd season, the 70th episode of the series overall. And it begins with a phone call. Muscle Man is calling his father to wish him a happy Father's Day, and instead of his father, his brother answers, and his brother tells him that their father is dead. The show opens on that. A man trying to do something small and loving, a phone call, and being met with the largest possible loss instead. At the funeral, Muscle Man makes a vow. His father, Muscle Dad, left instructions. He wants his hat's ashes spread at the highest point of the Trucker Hall of Fame. Note the strangeness of that already, and hold it, because it matters later. Not his ashes, his hat's ashes. The hat that reads World's Greatest Trucker, and Benson, who spends the entire series yelling, becomes a different person for this episode. He does not yell, he does not threaten. He calmly, respectfully asks Mordecai and Rigby to accompany Muscle Man on the journey. And when they ask why High Five Ghost, Muscle Man's actual best friend, cannot go instead, Benson explains gently that High Five Ghost does not deal with death well, and would not be much help. Even in a comedy episode, the show takes a moment to be precise and kind about the fact that different people carry death differently. So the three of them drive. And on the drive, Muscle Man talks about his father. He tells Mordecai and Rigby about the man. He tells them his father was a great trucker. And then they stop at a rest stop, and 3 truckers overhear them, and the truckers tell Mordecai and Rigby the truth. Muscle Dad was not a trucker. Muscle Dad was a forklift driver. The whole identity, the world's greatest trucker hat, the stories Muscle Man grew up on, all of it was built on something that was not true. And Muscle Man overhears this and he breaks. Here is the plain statement of what is happening. With the comedy removed, a man in the middle of grieving his father discovers at the worst possible moment that his father lied to him about who he was for his entire childhood. The foundation of how Muscle Man understood his own father, the world's greatest trucker, is revealed to be a fabrication. And it is revealed not gently, not by family, but by strangers at a rest stop, days after the funeral, when Muscle Man has no way to ask his father why. The grief and the betrayal arrive together, and there is no one left to direct the betrayal at because the person who lied is dead. The show then does something that elevates the whole episode. Muscle Man, devastated, says out loud what he now believes. He says his father was a screw-up, and then he extends it to himself. He is overweight, he works at a park he considers lame, he has only 3 friends. By his own account, in that moment, Muscle Man is a screw-up too. The son of a screw-up, the inheritor of failure. That is the lowest the character goes in the entire series, and the show lets him say it plainly. And then Muscle Man finds the letter. Behind a photograph, there is a note from Muscle Dad, written before his death, written specifically knowing his son would one day read it, and the note explains everything. Muscle Dad apologizes for the lie. He says, essentially, that the world is a harsh place, and that he pretended to be a trucker, kept up the fiction to toughen his son up for the time when he would be gone. The lie was not vanity. The lie was a strange, clumsy, misguided act of parenting. Muscle Dad believed his son needed to think he came from someone tougher than a forklift driver, needed that image to survive a hard world without a father in it. And the instruction, the hat's ashes spread at the highest point of the Trucker Hall of Fame, turns out to be a final prank aimed at the truckers who looked down on Muscle Dad for being a forklift driver. A last act of defiance from beyond the grave, against the people who made him feel small. This is the gap, and it is a rich one. The show frames Muscle Dad as a prankster, as comic relief even in death. And the episode pays it off with literal exploding ghosts. But underneath that, the show has laid out something genuinely unresolved about fathers and sons. Muscle Dad lied to his son for years. He did it, he claims, out of love, to prepare him. And the question the show leaves open, deliberately, is whether that was the right thing to do. Whether a lie told in love is still a wound. Muscle Man forgives his father. The episode ends with the forgiveness, with the bond restored, with Muscle Man understanding that the one thing his family never gets wrong is a prank, and finding in that a way to feel like he comes from somewhere after all. But the show never resolves whether Muscle Dad was actually right. It never tells you whether the toughening worked, whether Muscle Man is who he is because of the lie or in spite of it. It hands you a father who deceived his son for the son's own good, and a son who forgave him, and it lets you decide whether the deception was love or damage, or, most likely, both at once. And here is the connection to everything else this video has built. Muscle Man, the loudest character in regular show, the one defined by crude jokes in his My Mom routine, the one the audience is invited to find annoying, is given in this one episode a piece of interior life as complicated as anything Skips or Pops carries. He is a man performing toughness because his father trained him to perform toughness. The My Mom jokes, the bravado, the loudness, all of it, read through Trucker Hall of Fame, is not just an annoying personality. It is the inheritance of a forklift driver who told his son he was a trucker because he thought the world would eat a soft boy alive. The show does not state this. It just gives you the episode and trusts you to carry it back into every loud Muscle Man scene that comes after. And once you do, the loudness sounds different. It sounds like a costume a father left behind. By the finale's montage, Muscle Man has moved into a nicer trailer with Starla, and they have more children. The show gives him a good ending, a family, an upgrade. And read against Trucker Hall of Fame, that ending carries a quiet weight. Muscle Man became a father himself. The man whose own father lied to him to toughen him up for a hard world now has children of his own to raise. And the show never shows you what kind of father he is. Never tells you whether he repeats Muscle Dad's lie or breaks the pattern. It just gives you the children and lets the question hang. The inheritance continues. What Muscle Man does with it, the show leaves, like everything else, open. There is a character standing next to Muscle Man in almost every one of his scenes, who does not deal well with death, and whose own story the show tells almost entirely in the spaces between episodes. That is the next section. High Five Ghost is, for most of regular show, a character defined by proximity. He is Muscle Man's best friend. He is the small floating ghost with a single raised hand, the quieter half of a comic duo, the one who exists, in scene after scene, primarily to be next to Muscle Man. For a long stretch of the series, that is essentially the whole of his characterization. He is Muscle Man's +1. And yet the show, quietly, across the run, gives High Five Ghost a real interior life, and it does so almost entirely through small scattered details, rather than through any episode that announces itself as his. He has a brother, Low 5 Ghost. He does not, as Trucker Hall of Fame establishes, deal well with death, which for a ghost is a detail worth sitting with for a moment. He is a ghost who is uncomfortable around death. And he has a romantic life of his own, a girlfriend named Celia, which the show develops in the background of episodes that are ostensibly about other things. Here is the gap, and it is a structural one, similar to the gap discussed earlier with Eileen, but pushed even further. High 5 Ghost is one of the characters the show treats as its core ensemble, and he is the one the show gives the least direct attention. His arc, more than anyone's, happens off-screen in the gaps in the brief mentions, and the finale montage confirms just how much of a life the show had quietly assigned him without ever dramatizing it. In the 25-year montage, High 5 Ghost reunites with Celia, and the two of them become popular party DJs in Prague. Stop on that because it is one of the strangest and most charming endings in the montage. Prague. Of all the places the show could have sent any of its characters, it sends the quietest one, the background one, the plus one, to Prague to become a popular DJ. The show never explained how High 5 Ghost ends up in Prague. It never showed you his interest in music developing into a career. It never depicted the relationship with Celia reaching the point of a shared life abroad. It simply hands you, in a few seconds of montage, the news that the character you paid the least attention to went and built one of the most specific and adventurous lives of anyone in the cast. And that is the show making a quiet point, the kind it specialized in. The point is about attention. High 5 Ghost spent 8 years in the corner of the frame, next to Muscle Man, easy to overlook. And the show's reward for him, its ending for him, is a life that is anything but a corner. Prague, a career, a reunion with the person he loved. The show is gently telling you that the character you were not watching was having a whole life the entire time, a life with as much shape and specificity and joy in it as anyone's, and that you're not watching did not make it smaller. It just made it yours to discover, late in a montage, with a small shock of recognition. You spent 8 years assuming High 5 Ghost was a side character, and the finale reveals that he was the protagonist of his own story all along, the way everyone is, and that the show simply chose not to interrupt the main narrative to show it to you. The detail about death deepens this. High 5 Ghost does not deal well with death. The show establishes this as the reason he does not accompany Muscle Man on the Trucker Hall of Fame journey. And there is something quietly profound in a ghost being afraid of death, in the character who is, by his very nature, already on the other side of mortality, being the one least able to face it. The show never explains it. It never gives High 5 Ghost a backstory episode about how he died, or what death means to him, or why a ghost would fear the thing he has already passed through. It is one more open question, one more thing the show sets up and declines to resolve. But it adds a layer of melancholy to the cheerful Prague ending. The ghost who could not deal with death got, in the end, a life so full and so happy that it reads almost like a refusal of death. He went to the other side of the world. He found love. He found music. He found, in a montage measured in seconds, more life than the character ever seemed to be allotted. So the unsolved thing with High 5 Ghost is the largest version of the show's lesson about attention. The series spent 8 years training you to look at Mordecai and Rigby, and to a lesser degree at Skips and Benson and Pops, and to treat the rest of the park as background. And then the finale quietly reveals that the background was never background. That High 5 Ghost had a brother and a fear and a love and a future the whole time, and that the show simply trusted you to understand, when it finally showed you Prague, that you had been underestimating someone for 8 years. The show does not scold you for it. It just gives him the ending, lets it land, and moves on, and leaves you to feel the small, particular guilt of having walked past a whole person because they were standing slightly off to the side. There is an object in regular show that the characters spend an entire episode saying goodbye to, as though it were a person, and the show plays the goodbye completely straight. That object, and what the show does with objects in general, is the next section. Before that, a reminder, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is an episode in the 3rd season called Out of Commission, and its premise, stated plainly, is absurd. The park's golf cart is breaking down. It can no longer be repaired. And the episode is about Mordecai and Rigby giving the cart one last day, helping it complete its final wishes, before it drowns itself in a lake. The cart is treated, for the length of the episode, as a dying friend. A character with desires, and a death wish, and a right to a dignified end. It would be easy to file this as one of the show's weirder comic premises and move on, but Out of Commission is the clearest single example of something regular show did across its entire run, and it points at one of the show's quietest unstated ideas. Regular show takes objects seriously. It gives them weight. It treats the things that fill a life as though they were participants in that life, and it never fully explains why. and the not explaining is part of what makes the show feel the way it feels. Think about the objects that recur across the series and how much emotional cargo the show loads onto them. There is the cart, mourned and out of commission. There is the El Camino, the car associated with Gary, the friend who drives Skips to the Guardians of Eternal Youth, a vehicle that turns up across the mythology episodes as a kind of fixed point. There is the keyboard from The Power, the magical instrument from the very first episode, an object so central that the show named the final chapter of its finale after it. There are the VCRs and the tapes, the Fire VCR and the ice tape that Maillard prepared for Pop's destiny, ordinary household electronics revealed in Season 8 to be load-bearing pieces of a cosmic plan. And there is the final object of all, the VHS tape labeled Regular Show that Pops ejects in the last shot of the series. Lay those out next to each other and a pattern emerges that the show never states out loud. In Regular Show, objects are where meaning gets stored. The cart is not just a cart. The keyboard is not just a keyboard. The tapes are not just tapes. The show, again and again, takes a mundane object and lets it accumulate significance until it becomes something closer to a relic, a thing that holds history, a thing that can be mourned or feared or sought, or in the end, ejected with a final blessing. Here is the gap, and it is a question of method rather than plot. Why does the show do this? Why does a comedy about groundskeepers keep insisting that objects have weight? The show never tells you. It never has a character explain the philosophy, but the philosophy is visible in the pattern and it connects directly to what the show is about underneath everything. Regular Show is fundamentally a show about ordinary life containing more than it appears to. That is the premise stated at the very start of this video. Two underqualified men at a normal job, and the normal job keeps turning out to be cosmic. And the show's treatment of objects is that same idea applied at the smallest possible scale. A cart looks like a cart and is, the show insists, also a friend. A keyboard looks like a keyboard and is also the power that bookends a universe. A VCR looks like a VCR and is also an instrument of destiny. The objects are the thesis of the show, miniaturized. Everything ordinary is also something more, if you give it enough attention, and the show gives its objects exactly that attention, and trusts you to feel the weight without being told to. Out of Commission is the purest version, because it removes the cosmic excuse. The cart is not secretly magical. The cart is not a piece of Maillard's plan. The cart is just a cart, an old, broken-down golf cart, and the show mourns it anyway. It gives it a last day, it gives it final wishes, it gives it a death it chooses for itself, and the episode is not, ultimately, a joke at the cart's expense. It is the show practicing on the most disposable possible object, the act of taking something ordinary seriously enough to grieve it. The episode is teaching you, with a golf cart, how to feel about the things that fill a life. And it never explains that that is what it is doing. It just does it, straight-faced, and moves on. And this is why the final object lands the way it does. When Pops, in the last shot of the series, holds a VHS tape labeled Regular Show and ejects it, that image only works because the show spent 8 years teaching you that its objects carry meaning. A show that treated objects as disposable could not end on an object. Regular Show could, because it had trained you. The cart, the keyboard, the tapes, all of it was, in a sense, preparing you to understand that a single VHS tape could hold an entire series, an entire universe, an entire run of a television show, and that ejecting it could be a complete and sufficient ending. The objects were never just objects. They were the show teaching you its own language, so that when it spoke its final sentence in the form of a tape, you would already know how to read it. So the unsolved question of objects in Regular Show is the gentlest one in this video, and maybe the most quietly beautiful. The show never explains why it grieves a cart, why it builds a finale around a keyboard, why it lets VCRs carry destiny. It just does, consistently, for 8 years, and the cumulative effect is a show in which the ordinary world is dense with meaning, in which a thing you would throw away can be a friend, in which the line between an object and a memory is deliberately, lovingly blurred. That is a strange thing for a slacker comedy to spend 8 years insisting on. And it is the reason The Last Shot works. The show had always secretly been a show about how much an ordinary thing can hold. There is one episode that gathers nearly every strange figure the show ever introduced into a single place at a single time, and watching it is the closest the series ever comes to showing you the full size of what it built. That is the next section. There is a moment at the start of the 4th season where the entire world of Regular Show seems to end, and the way it ends tells you something about the show that no single ordinary episode ever could. The episode is Exit 9B. It is the first episode of the 4th season, the 80th episode of the series overall, and it first aired on October 1st, 2012. It is a half-hour special, and it opens not with the show's usual cheerful synthesizer theme, but with a dark, distorted remix of it, the universal television shorthand for everything has gone wrong. Here is what happens. A new intern arrives at the park. His name is Thomas, and it is his first day, and he cannot find anyone. He is on the phone with his mother, telling her it is his first internship day. And then there is a crash outside, and Thomas runs out to investigate, and he sees the park in complete chaos. A mysterious bearded figure is chasing the park employees and shooting them with a laser stun gun. Only Mordecai and Rigby escape, and they escape by using a time machine, the one from an earlier episode called Bad Kiss, jumping forward 2 months into the future. And the moment they vanish into time, the bearded stranger demolishes the house. Sit with that opening because it is genuinely audacious for a show of this kind. Regular show, 80 episodes in, opens its 4th season by destroying the park, scattering the staff, demolishing the house, and sending its 2 protagonists fleeing through time. It begins the season by burning down its own premise. When Mordecai and Rigby arrive 2 months in the future, they find that the park is gone, replaced, and that their friends have been brainwashed and given new identities. The show plays this for a specific kind of unease. Some of the brainwashing barely takes. Skips and Pops are largely still themselves, their personalities too fixed to fully overwrite. But others are unrecognizable. Muscle Man, of all people, has been turned into a professor of quantum physics. The show is showing you its own characters as strangers, as wrong versions of themselves, and it is unsettling in exactly the way it is meant to be. And then the bearded stranger reveals who he is. He is Garrett Bobby Ferguson Jr., the son of Garrett Bobby Ferguson, the giant floating head Mordecai and Rigby defeated back in the 2nd season episode High Score. And this is where Exit 9B becomes the episode this section is actually about, because Garrett Bobby Ferguson Jr. explains his plan, and his plan is a portal. The entire Exit 9 billion construction project, the freeway being built over the park, is a portal to the underworld. And through it, Garrett Bobby Ferguson Jr. intends to revive every villain Mordecai and Rigby have ever defeated, including his own father, so that all of them together can take revenge. Think about what that means structurally. Exit 9B gathers into one place at one time nearly every antagonist the show had produced across 3 seasons. An army of the underworld, dozens of figures, every fallen enemy returning at once. And then, when the buried park staff seem doomed, Skips does the same thing from the other side. He summons his allies. Gary, the friend with the El Camino. Death, Tecmo, the immortal friend from Skips' youth. The god of basketball, the guardians of eternal youth, the cosmic babies who grant immortality, the baby ducks. The show assembles against the army of villains, an answering army of every strange ally it had ever introduced. This is the gap, and it is a different kind of gap than the others in this video. It is not a question the show refuses to answer. It is a revelation the show offers and then mostly steps away from. Exit 9B is the moment regular show shows you the full size of what it had built, and it is genuinely startling, because the show spent 3 seasons hiding that size. Watch the series episode by episode, and each strange figure arrives alone. Garrett Bobby Ferguson in High Score, the Guardians of Eternal Youth in their episodes, Death in his, Tecmo in his. Each one feels like a one-off, a self-contained piece of weirdness, here for an episode and then gone. And Exit 9B pulls them all into a single frame and reveals that they were never one-offs at all. They were all residents of the same world. They had all been accumulating off-screen in the show's background into a roster large enough to fill an apocalyptic battle. And the unsolved thing, the thing the show raises and does not pursue, is the implication of that roster. Exit 9B proves that the world of regular show is dense, far denser than the slacker comedy surface ever suggested. It proves that behind the park there is an entire populated cosmos of gods and immortals and reapers and revived dead, and that Mordecai and Rigby's ordinary job has over 3 seasons quietly generated dozens of enemies and dozens of allies. An entire mythology's worth of figures. The episode shows you all of this, lets you feel the scale of it, and then the season continues and the show goes back mostly to 11-minute episodes about ordinary things. It does not sit you down and explain the cosmology. It just flashes the full picture once and trusts you to carry the knowledge of that scale back into every smaller episode that followed. There is a detail in Exit 9B that connects it directly to a section earlier in this video, and it is worth ending on because it shows the show building its own continuity with real care. When Skips is brainwashed, the way Mordecai and Rigby break him free is by reaching for the secret of his name. They remind him of why he is called Skips, of the only woman he ever loved. They use Mona, and this works because in an earlier episode called Diary, Skips had told them that secret. The knowledge they used to save him in Exit 9B was planted seasons before, and this is the show, in the middle of an apocalyptic battle special, quietly demonstrating its own thesis. The small things matter. A secret shared in a quiet episode becomes seasons later, the thing that saves a friend from being erased. Nothing in this show is ever just filler. Exit 9B is the loud, large, explosive proved of the same idea the dome proved. And the objects proved regular show was always keeping track. It was always building. The ordinary episodes were never disposable, and Exit 9B exists in part to make sure you knew it. And there is one more piece, the gentlest one. The intern, Thomas, arrives in the middle of all this. His first day at the park is the day the world ends and an army of the underworld pours out of a portal. Thomas is the audience surrogate, the new person, dropped without warning into a world far stranger and far larger than he was told to expect. And that is, in the end, what Exit 9B does to the viewer too. It is the episode where you, like Thomas, walk into the park expecting an ordinary job and discover all at once the full and frightening size of what you had actually wandered into. The show had been building that size for 3 seasons in plain sight. Exit 9B is simply the day it let you see all of it at once, and then characteristically closed the curtain again and went back to raking leaves. That, finally, is the shape of every unsolved question in regular show, and it is the shape worth ending on. This video has walked through them. The universe has reset an unknowable number of times, and the show refuses the number. Skips has carried a grief of unmeasurable length, and the show refuses his age. Anti-Pops was created as a balance, and the show refuses to settle whether he was villain or victim. Time travel runs through the series without rules, and the show refuses to write them. Mordecai's wife is never named. The crew's grief is never dramatized. Death's nature is never fixed. The dome was a plan disguised as a joke, and the show refuses to tell you how early the plan began. Benson rebuilt his crew, and the show refuses to say whether he knew why. Eileen transformed completely with no transformation episode. Muscle Man inherited a lie from a father who was no longer there to explain it. High Five Ghost lived an entire life in the corner of the frame. The show grieved a golf cart and never said why. Exit 9B showed you the full size of the world and then put it away. And Pops, at the very end, sits somewhere bright, holding a tape labeled with the show's own name, and the show refuses to tell you where he is. Every one of those is the same act. A show that built things large enough to demand answers, and then at each threshold chose not to answer, because it understood that the unanswered version of a thing lives longer than the answered one. A number ends a feeling, an explanation makes a thing smaller. Regular show spent 8 years learning that, and its finale is the lesson applied at full scale. It would have been easy to make this show small, to let the park be only a park, the dome be only a joke, death be only a gag, Eileen be only a crush, the cart be only a cart, Pops be only comic relief. The show declined every time. It built a cosmology under a slacker comedy and trusted that the audience would not need it. Underlined, it made its kindest, silliest character the one who breaks an eternal cycle that every wiser version of him had accepted. It made its most exasperated character reveal his love by rebuilding the very thing that exasperated him. It made its quietest character carry the longest sorrow, and never made him describe it. It gave its loudest character a forklift driver for a father, and a lie for an inheritance. It sent its most overlooked character to Prague, and it ended not on an answer, but on an image. A peaceful place, a man in a brown suit, a tape, a final, gentle verdict that it was a good show. And then it stopped, before it could be made to explain itself, leaving every large thing exactly as large as it had built it. That is what regular show was, not the show it appeared to be from the outside. Underneath the 11-minute runtime and the golf cart and the coffee shop, it was a series with the patience to build mysteries it had no intention of solving, because it understood that the things you keep thinking about are never the things you were handed complete. They are the things left open. The park endures, the crew grows old and happy. The universe, for once, does not reset. And Pops watches all of it from somewhere the show will never name, and calls it good, and that not knowing, that final open door, is the show's last and most generous gift to anyone willing to keep standing in front of it. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.